Hey everybody, Phil Kerner here, the Tool and Die Guy, and welcome to video lesson number 291. And tonight we're going to revisit checking a piece of material, a block of steel, for squareness. You know, I recorded a video on this a few years ago using the technique that's worked for me for over 30 years, and I know there were a few questions about the way the technique works, and I want to make sure tonight we don't leave anything on the table. A few things to know. When you're going to check a block for squareness, a piece of material for squareness, your absolute you start with, of course, is your surface plate. And a surface plate is one of the, what I call, standards of the industry, a gold standard. Your surface plate and your indicator and your gauge blocks. Another thing I hammer into my apprentices all the time is flat, parallel, and square. Once you get it up here, that a block has 6 sides and not 4, and that you're going to make things as parallel and flat as you can, it's a lot easier to check things for squareness. So let's get started. I hope this video answers any questions you might have left on the theory behind checking a block for squareness.
Alright, the first thing we're going to learn in this video is we want to make sure that we establish some absolutes. And for this lesson, our first absolute is going to be this surface plate. Now in this case I'm just using an old cast iron surface plate, which will be eminently usable for this lesson, but usually in a tool room or inspection facility you're going to see a granite surface plate, and of course those come in different grades too. The second absolute we're going to introduce here is a Starrett service gauge. This is one of my smaller ones, and if you've watched my videos before, this is just a simple plate that I've mounted to the front by just simply grinding a slot into my surface gauge, and you can just belt sand this radius on if you want. It's just a reference part and mark, and then you can flat stone it or something to get it a little smoother. Okay, and the last thing, of course, is going to be my inner rapid half thousandths indicator. So when we originally did this lesson, part 1, what we did was we took a block, and here's an old 1, 2, 3 block that we're going to check for squareness. So the first thing we need to make sure of, though, is that this block, when it was originally ground, and this is a fairly old one, it's not even mine, I think I ended up at this with a garage sale or an auction, so we're going to find out how square it is. But the part we need to make sure of is that when we do machine a block square, we start with the 2 biggest sides. And I've done videos on how to score up a block, but we always want to get the 2 biggest sides flat and parallel. So now we are going to make an assumption here, okay, that you've ground these 2 sides flat and parallel. That's part of squaring up material. This method only works, of course, if you've already squared up your material correctly. So these 2 sides, the 2 largest sides, should be flat and parallel. And the next thing, of course, you would do if you were squaring this block up, you would introduce, if we're using a grinder, this grinding vise. We would set the block in here. Now we've grabbed these 2 sides that we've made flat and parallel, and we're going to square this side up to it, and then we would flip the vise on its side, and a good square vise, then we would grind this side. Then we could lay the 2 remaining sides down flat and grind them parallel with the original ones. Now, what I want to make sure everybody understands, with that in mind, why this method works, okay? This method works because we're going to compare side to side. And I understand that there's a little confusion why this actually works, because we're not technically using anything to say, hey, what's square here, except our indicators. So let's get this set right. We're going to set a 0 on the first side, turn the block around, not too square, huh? About 1.5 thou total indicator reading, which would mean we're about 7/10 out of square. And I'll explain that in a second. Let's see how these sides are. That's plus 1 thousandths. Plus 1 thousandths. So actually these 2 sides, if we set a 0 there, appear to be pretty darn square because they're reading the same, within a couple tenths. So we're off a little bit here. This is about 1/2 thousandths undersize. This is about about 0 there. So one of these sides is off a little bit. Now here's why this does work, in case there was any question about this. let's take a piece of cellophane paper that's a thousandth of an inch thick and kick it under one end here. Now what's this side read? Plus 1.5. So that has kicked our block this way towards the indicator. And that's how you would know you're out of square. Now, without the cellophane, let's set a 0 just for reference. And then place the cellophane underneath that corner. So if your block was out of square, this will definitely reveal it. Okay? So that's how you compare side to side using that method. Now, I'm not above learning something myself, and one of the things I have learned is it is nice, if you can afford it, to have something perfectly square to compare to, i.e. a cylinder square, a magnetic cylinder square. In this case, I'm just going to use this $875 Hermann Schmidt grinding vise, which is guaranteed to be within a couple tenths total squareness, and it's a great gauge. So now what we'll do is simply roll our indicator up and set a 0 here. Now if this vise is supposed to be perfectly square, I should get the same 0 on each side just for the purposes of this lesson. It says 2/10, that's about 2/10. And again, this isn't the best surface plate in the world, okay? So we're not going to panic here. Alright, so perfect from side to side. So you can also do that. Now this is an $875 vise, and like I said, a cylinder square is going to cost you somewhere around $400 to $500. But once you have something that's been established as a square, then you can check your work to that. Nice. We're getting out the same thing. So either way works. This just, the first method just checks it from side to side and you can tell which way your block is kicked, and you'd have to re-square it up. And that's a whole nother lesson. But this method definitely works, provided you've ground 2 sides flat and parallel and ground 2 more sides square to that. And then you square up your ends and check it that way. So again, your big thing we have to remember here is this plane is your absolute to compare your other planes to for squareness. So I hope that makes things a little more clear. This method does work. It's just telling you relative to each side how far out of square you are. The other method with using a cylinder square or an expensive vise or something you know is perfectly square is also a great way to check blocks for squareness if you have the money or have access to an expensive piece of equipment. I hope that helps, and I'm Phil Kerner, the Tool and Die Guy. We'll see you on the next video.
So I hope that video kind of makes it a little clearer for you guys. You really understand this concept of flat, parallel, and square, and especially after tonight, squareness, okay? Because that's what I want. That's what you guys are here for. I want you guys to be able to go into your place of business as a machinist, a toolmaker, an engineer, and when somebody says, how'd you learn how to do that? Or that's really pretty clever. You know, even if you don't say it, I'd like to know that the Tool and Die Guy taught you something you didn't know. Alright, so I look forward to your polite comments under the video, and we'll see you here in the tool room for the next lesson.